Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through the creaky door of a medieval cottage. The fire is crackling low, casting shadows on crumbling wattle and daub walls. The thatched roof is sagging. You're lying on a straw-filled mattress that smells like old goats tucked in the same room, where four other bodies are curled up for the night, some snoring, others murmuring in dreams. You hear someone rustle to your left. A couple whispers, and then the creaking of boards. You realize with dawning discomfort that something intensely personal is happening right there, barely feet from where you're trying to fall asleep. Yes, this is your sex education in the Middle Ages. No curtains, no privacy, just wooden walls thin enough to hear a rat yawn. And you probably won't survive this, at least not without a permanent cringe seared into your soul. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you in a bustling city? A quiet countryside? Let's turn time and space into background noise. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a medieval village. You are not a noble. You're not even a merchant. You're one of the hundreds of peasants living in a single-room house on a narrow patch of land, under a feudal lord's watchful eye. And sex, it's not secret. It's not sacred. It's something you try to do quietly, but that never works. If you're married, and you probably were by your mid-teens, your wedding night didn't happen behind a locked door with a candlelit bed. It happened under your parents' roof or your spouse's, or in the case of some villages, right in front of witnesses. You think that's exaggeration? No. In some communities, the act of consummation was considered so important for social order that it had to be verified. The guests might not have stood bedside with goblets in hand, but they were nearby waiting for the proof, a bloody sheet, a satisfied grunt, a cry of pain or pleasure. Something. Sex was communal by nature, not because people were exhibitionists, but because there was no other way. Your cottage had one room. One. A central hearth, maybe a rickety table and sleeping areas that doubled as storage. Parents, kids, maybe a grandparent, and sometimes a farm animal or two, all crammed together. Want privacy? You'll have to wait until everyone's asleep, and pray the rooster doesn't wake them early. Still, people found ways. A straw curtain might be hung between beds if you were lucky enough to have more than one. A cloak thrown over a rope for symbolic modesty. Sometimes couples would sneak outside behind barns or into the woods. But even that had dangers. There were rumors of spirits, demons, even the devil himself roaming after dark. Not to mention pigs and stray dogs sniffing about. But you weren't really focused on romance. You married to survive. You had sex to produce heirs, and sometimes to stay warm. Medieval nights were cold. Bitterly so. In many households, it was common for everyone to pile into bed together. Parents, children, cousins wrapped in shared blankets, body heat mingling. If you and your spouse wanted time alone, you had to find it while the others were asleep, which meant you learned the fine art of silent fumbling beneath the sheets. Sometimes a cough or snore from the corner let you know someone was still awake. But what could they do? This was just life. And then there was the church. Ah yes, the omnipresent eye of morality. The church did not smile upon passion. Sex was for procreation, not pleasure. Missionary position only, and don't you dare enjoy it. Anything more adventurous was whispered about as sinful or even demonic. Yet people still craved intimacy. They just had to disguise it under layers of guilt. You remember hearing your village priest preach, "Lust is the gateway to hell." But you also remember that time he got caught visiting the baker's widow after Compline. Hypocrisy wasn't new. Still, the fear lingered. Even within marriage, people confessed. "Father, I touched my wife with desire," and penance was handed down. Fasts, prayers, abstinence during holy seasons, of which there were many. Advent, Lent, Fridays, feasts of saints, days before communion, days after childbirth. The calendar was a minefield. In some cases, people calculated the days left in the year when sex wasn't forbidden. The number was shockingly small, and yet, somehow families still grew. Children still came. Clearly, the rules weren't always followed. They were just preached. Now imagine you're a young woman newly married. Your husband is 10 years older, maybe more. You've never been alone with a man before, let alone seen one unclothed. There is no gentle build-up, no whispered consent. He climbs into the bed next to you, careful not to wake the others, and you feel your heart race not out of excitement, but fear. And when it's over, you lie still blinking at the dark ceiling, wondering if you did it right. Hoping the neighbor didn't hear. Knowing the blood on the sheet in the morning is all the confirmation the world needs. Or perhaps you're a servant in a castle. Even nobles don't have private rooms, just tapestries and screens. You're tasked with cleaning up. One night you notice the sheets are tangled strangely. There are marks, nails scratched into the wood, a pillow flung far from the bed. You don't ask questions. You know better. Because behind every curtain was a secret. Some darker than others, some sad, some tender, and some that would make your skin crawl. But all of them were part of life. And life didn't slow down for modesty. You turn over in your straw bed, scratching at a flea bite, and think about the couple next door. They just had their third child. You wonder when they find the time. You wonder why no one ever talks about it. Then you remember, the less said, the better. In this world, silence is survival, especially when privacy is a luxury you've never known. And yet there is intimacy. There are moments stolen in the shadows, a soft touch while others sleep, a whispered promise, a shared smile across the fire. It's not romantic by modern standards. It's raw, earthy, sometimes desperate, but it's real. And in its own quiet way, it binds people together. Even if there's always someone snoring in the corner. You wake before dawn. The coals in the hearth are barely glowing, and your breath curls visibly in the chill air. Someone nearby shifts under a wool blanket, pulling it tighter against the cold. The floor creaks as you rise, stepping carefully to avoid waking the others. But no matter how gentle you are, someone always stirs a cough, a grunt, the sound of hay rustling under an elbow. And here, once again, you remember privacy doesn't exist. The medieval world was a tapestry of proximity. Proximity to your livestock, to your children, to your in-laws, to your neighbors. In the manor, in the village, or even in the castle. Everyone heard everything. In fact, walls weren't even designed to mute sound. They were built to hold up the roof and little else. If you whispered, someone heard. If you cried, someone knew. And if you made love, the entire building was aware. You start your day with the chores. Water must be fetched from the well. Animals must be fed. If you're lucky, you'll eat a piece of coarse rye bread and perhaps drink a little watered-down ale. Your spouse joins you with a weary smile and nothing is said about the night before. There's no pillow talk, no slow morning embrace. There are duties to tend, and talking about sex simply isn't done. especially not when the village elder might be within earshot. Sex was necessary, yes, but it wasn't discussed. It wasn't romanticized. It wasn't candlelit poetry and scented oils. It was more often than not a transaction of flesh meant to carry forward a family name or bind two lands or ensure a son would inherit the mill. And then there were the unspoken consequences of such communal intimacy, because where there was no privacy, there was also no real consent. You start to notice things. The way that girl flinches when her father-in-law walks past. The bruises beneath sleeves. The hushed talk around the well about a child that looked too much like a traveling friar. These are things that no one speaks about openly, but everyone sees. In this world, the boundary between what's public and what's private is not just blurred, it's obliterated. Your body isn't entirely your own. Your marriage, your bed, your experiences, they belong in some strange way to the community. Because even if you don't share the act, you share the noise, the knowledge, and sometimes the shame. Think about the feast days. After a holy celebration, there's usually dancing and drinking. The mead flows, the laughter echoes, and couples slip away behind haystacks or into shadowed corners of the churchyard. Young lovers trying to steal something rare a moment. But the morning after that moment becomes gossip. Your name is on tongues. You're not anonymous. You never are. Because you live in a place where everyone knows everyone and everything. There are no locks, no sealed letters, no "do not disturb" signs hanging from doors. There are no doors, period. So how do people navigate desire in a world where nothing is hidden? You learn discretion, yes, but more often you learn endurance. You develop a kind of stoicism. You learn to focus on survival, and yet desire persists. You've seen it, haven't you? The way a man's eyes follow a woman as she walks past the marketplace. The way hands brush a little too long when passing bread across the table. The quickening of breath, the glance that lingers. These are the languages of longing spoken quietly in the daylight. At night, though, things change. Shadows stretch. Modesty slips. The line between consent and expectation becomes murky. You remember your neighbor he boasted about bedding his wife 3 times in one night, loudly enough for the baker to hear it from across the street. His voice echoed down the lane like a rooster's crow. Was it true? Was it bravado? You'll never know. But you do know his wife never spoke of it. The noise of sex in the Middle Ages was more than just physical. It was social noise, too. It meant something to be heard. It meant virility, power, control. And silence, on the other hand, was sometimes mistaken for shame or worse, disobedience. A wife who made no sound was thought to be cold. A man who made too many might be laughed at behind his back. And then there's you still lying awake some nights, unable to close your eyes while others move in the dark around you. You're not trying to listen, but there's no escape. The creaking of the bed frame, the muffled breath, the rhythm that builds and fades. It's like the night itself is alive. Intimacy floats through the air like smoke from the hearth, impossible to grasp and impossible to avoid. Sometimes you envy the nuns and monks, cloistered away, sworn to celibacy, their days filled with silence and prayer. At least they have their own cells, their own beds, the illusion of solitude. But then again, even abbeys had secrets. Even the most pious walls couldn't keep out the human heart. You think of your own parents. Did they ever love each other? Did they ever have a moment of tenderness? Or were they simply doing what needed to be done in the same bed they shared with your aunt and your younger siblings? You'll never ask. You wouldn't dare. But sometimes, on a quiet night, you catch a glimpse. You see an older couple share a laugh over stew, a touch on the shoulder, a look that softens, and you think maybe there was something deeper, something warm, something real flickering in the dark like a hidden flame. Still, the lack of privacy never stops being a fact of life. It's the rhythm that defines your world. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. In the same space with the same people, over and over. There's no time for dreaming, no room for longing. And yet, the body remembers. It remembers the feel of skin under coarse linen, the sound of breath caught in the throat, the ache of wanting to be alone and the impossibility of it. And so you make do, you find connection in whispers, in fingers laced under a shared blanket, in soft moans barely heard over the howl of the wind outside. You survive. Not with silk sheets or scented oils, but with stolen moments. Not with locked doors, but with closed eyes. And maybe, just maybe, in that world of noise and closeness and constant presence, love becomes something quieter. Something not hidden, but hidden in plain sight. A glance. A sigh. A shared silence between two souls who know what it means to exist without walls. The days are long, and the nights seem longer still. You labor from dawn to dusk, muscles aching, hands cracked from work. In the daylight, your body is owned by your duties, plowing, baking, spinning, nursing, bartering. By night, it belongs to someone else, to a spouse, to a custom, to the expectations that hang heavier than the thatch above your head. And tonight, like every night, you return to your shared bed. Not just with a partner, but with whoever else lives under the same roof, a brother, a cousin, maybe even a servant who can't afford their own place. The space is cramped, the mattress lumpy. You smell feet. You hear snoring. But most of all, you feel watched, even in the dark. You reach out to your partner slowly, hoping to find some closeness. But you're careful, because others are near, because the floorboards squeak, because someone might whisper about you in the morning. Still, you crave connection. Not just sex, but closeness, reassurance, a reminder that you are more than your labor, more than a set of hands or hips or expectations. But the world you live in doesn't have much patience for dreams. You think of courtly love, the kind sung about by troubadours and poets. You once heard a song in the village square about a knight who wrote sonnets for a lady locked in a tower. It made you blush. The idea of someone yearning from afar, sending secret letters, aching for just one touch. But that was fantasy. It belonged to nobles, and even then it was mostly fiction. In your world, there are no towers, no sonnets, just straw beds and thin walls. Still, the influence of those songs leaks into daily life. Some villagers begin to mimic the gestures, leaving little offerings, braiding flowers, composing awkward rhymes scratched into wood. It's sweet, even if it's clumsy. But you know what happens next. The church steps in. You've heard Father Bertram sermonize against it. Carnal affection disguised as romance is the devil's music. Guard your soul lest it burn. He says that love should be obedient, that marriage is a duty, not a delight, that lust must be tamed even between husband and wife. And so you try. You fold yourself inward. You suppress the heat in your chest when your partner touches you gently. You bury the ache of wanting to be touched, not as a duty, but as a desire. You lie still, silent as bodies shift beside you and the fire dies down. But even as you try to forget, the world around you constantly reminds. Take the bathhouse. Yes, there were some in medieval towns, public ones. You might think they'd be places of scandal, but oddly, they were ordinary. A place where people gathered undressed and scrubbed themselves in view of strangers. Men and women sometimes bathed together depending on the region and the decade. There was laughter, gossip, and yes, sometimes more. But even here, sex wasn't private. It was a transaction. In larger towns, bathhouse attendants often offered extra services. Some operated as disguised brothels. Others were more discreet. But in every case, there were eyes watching, always watching. The idea of intimacy in secret. It almost didn't exist. Not for peasants, not even for the wealthy. Privacy was something associated with confessionals and tombs. You recall hearing a story of a noblewoman who had a wooden screen built around her bed. It was considered scandalously extravagant. People whispered that she must have been hiding something. Because why else would a person want to be unseen? That's how far removed the idea of solitude was. So foreign, it was viewed as suspicious. And if you're wondering how lovers ever managed affairs in such a world, the answer is they didn't. Not often. Adultery was dangerous. For women it meant disgrace, exile, sometimes death. For men it depended. If he was rich, he could buy silence. If he was poor, he risked being beaten or fined. But despite the risk, it still happened. Because desire doesn't die in darkness. It thrives there. You remember when the miller's wife disappeared for 2 days. Everyone speculated. Some said she ran off with a peddler. Others said she'd gone mad. When she returned, she was quiet, withdrawn. No one pressed her for answers. But her husband's eyes told their own story, bloodshot and cold. In some towns, charivari was the punishment for perceived sexual deviance, a kind of public shaming. Villagers would bang pots and pans outside the house of a couple thought to be mismatched or immoral. They'd shout crude songs, mimic the act itself, or parade effigies through the streets. It was mockery turned ritual, a way to enforce morality with humiliation. So if you ever thought of escaping with a lover, better be ready for more than heartbreak. Be ready for the sound of jeers following you through muddy streets. Be ready for your children to suffer because of your shame. Be ready to seen, because in this world everything is seen. You lie in bed now, eyes wide open, staring at the dark that isn't really dark. The embers glow faintly, casting silhouettes of tools, blankets, feet. Someone stirs. You hold your breath. Was that a sigh? A whisper, a kiss? You can't tell. You don't want to know. You roll over and bury your face in the blanket, hoping for sleep, for stillness. And when the cock crows and light slips in through the cracks, no one says anything. Not about what they heard, not about what they saw. Everyone just begins the day again. Because in this world, intimacy is not something you own. It is something you navigate, quietly, carefully, and always with the awareness that someone somewhere is listening. You never truly adjust to it, the fact that your body is never entirely your own, not in this place, not in this time. Even when your limbs are sore from the day's labor, even when your spirit longs for rest, you carry that subtle awareness. You are always visible, always audible, always within reach. Not because anyone is watching you maliciously, but because there is simply no place to go. You rise early again. The morning chill bites at your skin, and you grope blindly for the coarse shift lying near the foot of your bed. You try not to think about last night, about the couple sleeping across from you. about the soft sounds that broke through the silence, the ones you tried to ignore. You can't blame them. You've been there too, but still it lingers. And today, there is more talk. The blacksmith's daughter, only 14, is to be married next week. She walks past you with a bundle of firewood, her eyes cast downward. You wonder if she knows what to expect, if anyone has told her, if she even wants this. But in the village, it doesn't matter what she wants. Marriage isn't about affection. It's about land, labor, bloodlines, alliances. Most marriages are arranged sometimes when the children are still children. You remember your own betrothal, your hands shaking as the deal was made. The pigs you exchanged, the prayer the priest offered, more legal contract than spiritual right. You weren't given a room to yourself on your wedding night. No one was. At best, you were given a corner, a blanket hung from the ceiling. At worst, you were surrounded by those who watched and waited, not with cruelty perhaps, but with the weight of expectation. A girl must prove her virginity. A man must prove his strength. If the deed was done and the sheet was stained, it was shown to the family, sometimes even celebrated. It sounds barbaric now, doesn't it? But for them, for you, it's normal. The idea of a private honeymoon suite is absurd. That kind of thing belongs to lords and ladies, and even they must sometimes perform for the court. For peasants, the concept of sex as a personal matter barely exists. It's public, measured, validated, and yet it's not without tenderness. You remember a story told by the village herbalist, an old woman with bent fingers and clouded eyes. She spoke of her wedding night, not with shame, not with fear, but with a kind of soft sorrow. Her husband, she said, had simply held her hand. They'd laid side by side and waited until the others had fallen asleep. And then with no words, no commands, they'd found each other. Quietly, clumsily, carefully. She smiled when she told you, as if to say, yes, even here, even now, love can be born. But not always. You've also seen the darker side. A woman who bore 7 children in 9 years. Her eyes sunken, her voice brittle. She moved through the village like a ghost, and no one asked why. You knew. Everyone knew. Her husband drank. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for silence. And she had nowhere to go. That's the truth you carry. There is no refuge, no safe space. If your partner is cruel, there are no doors to lock him out. If he raises a hand, or worse, no neighbor will intervene. It's not seen as their place. Marriage is sacred, they say, even when it hurts. So you walk with caution. You speak softly. You weigh each glance. Because in a world with no privacy, every interaction is a performance. Every touch, a transaction. Every word, a possible rumor. The fields offer no escape. Even there, you are never alone. You dig, you harvest, you weed side by side with family and strangers. And during the breaks, there's laughter, yes, songs, but also eyes that linger too long. Hands that rest too low on the back. Jokes that make your stomach twist. And what can you say? You can't accuse. You can't retreat. So you learn to navigate. With silence. With smiles that deflect. With distance. Yet sometimes, despite the impossibility, people still fall in love. You've seen it. 2 teens exchanging bread behind the well. A widow blushing as the carpenter sharpens her scythe. A shepherd's son who waits by the road just to walk alongside the potter's apprentice. It's rare, and it's risky. But it happens. And when it does, you cherish it. Even if there's no place to be alone, Even if your only shelter is a field of tall grass or a space between hay bales, you take what you can get. And it's not just the poor. Nobles may have curtains and tapestries, but even in castles, servants come and go. Walls are thin. Gossip is currency. Lovers sneak behind statues into cloisters behind the folds of a tent. And if they're caught, it depends. Sometimes a flogging, sometimes exile, sometimes nothing. Power protects, but not you. If you are caught with someone you shouldn't be outside of marriage, outside of permission, you could be forced to confess before the village. Fined, whipped, paraded with a sign around your neck. Women especially bear the brunt of it. A girl accused of lust might be called ruined for life regardless of the truth. Her chances at marriage vanish. She becomes a cautionary tale. So you learn to be careful. You guard your body, your voice, your secrets, and you begin to see the value of quiet intimacy. A hand held beneath a table, a smile shared across the chapel, a kiss stolen in the dark corner of the barn, the hay pricking your skin, the knowledge that you could be seen making your heart pound harder than the act itself. But you do it anyway, because you need it. Not just the act, but the feeling, the connection. The moment when someone chooses you, not out of duty or arrangement or law, but because they want to. That's rare. And it's everything. And so in this medieval world of endless closeness and noise and rules, you become an artist of subtlety, a master of silence, a keeper of glances. And when night falls again, and the fire burns low, and the shared bed beckons you, slip under the covers and reach out. Not boldly, not with ceremony, just quietly, carefully. Hoping that for one night in this world, without doors, your body and your heart can belong to you. Even just for a little while. The moon hangs high, pale, and watching as you stir beneath your rough wool blanket. You're not alone, never alone. Someone is breathing heavily beside you, someone else muttering in sleep across the room. And there, just behind the thin cloth, hung between sleeping spaces, you hear it again. That unmistakable rhythm, the hushed gasp. A quiet murmur meant only for one, but captured by many. You press your hand against your ear, not because you're scandalized, but because it makes no difference. Sound moves through the room like mist. Even if you try to block it out, it finds you. This is the truth of your existence. Sex is never truly private. It is heard. It is shared. It is in some ways endured. And the strange part is, no one talks about it. The morning after, the woman might rise first, busy herself with the fire, or draw water. Face blank, voice steady. The man might boast a little too loudly about the weather, or the weight of the oxen in the next field. But not a word is said about the night. It's not shame exactly. It's just practice. A habit born of centuries of living shoulder to shoulder. You survive by pretending nothing ever happens. But you remember what you heard. And it's not just one couple. It's everyone. Eventually. Young or old, married or not, love is squeezed between obligation and routine. There's no such thing as alone time. If you're lucky, you get a little less watched. In this world, physical closeness is constant. You eat together, sleep together, grieve together. You see everything: how your father snores, how your sister combs her hair, how your uncle limps when he walks. And yes, how your neighbor pulls the blanket up after a shared moment of intimacy with his wife. You see it all. You learn to keep it all behind the eyes. But you wonder, what does that do to a person? What does it mean to live without walls, without doors, without privacy? For some, it dulls the edges. They become indifferent. They shrug off the presence of others as though their body isn't sacred, just functional. But for others, it sharpens things. A stolen touch becomes meaningful. A whispered word in a crowded room is electric. You start to see intimacy not as an act, but as a rebellion. A rebellion against the noise, against the expectations, against the rules. A rebellion against the idea that your body is just another tool, another means to an end. So you begin to crave quiet. Not silence, because that's never possible, but a moment, a pause, a breath that belongs to no one else. And sometimes you find it. In the fields at dusk, when the sky glows, and no one is near you, might meet someone by the hedgerow. Your hands brush as you pass. You linger. You share no words because words carry. But your eyes say everything. Or on feast nights when the village dances and the mead flows, you slip away. Behind the barn, behind the bell tower, into the orchard where the trees offer a kind of shelter. There's no bed, no softness, just earth and air. But you don't care, because it's yours alone. These moments are rare, precious. They aren't about climax. They're about escape from the crowd, from the watching eyes, from the weight of a world that doesn't believe in solitude. You carry them with you, like the baker's apprentice. He always lingers near the same stall. He pretends to inspect the pears, but you know he's waiting. He's looking for her, the miller's niece, and they never speak. Not here, not where others can see. But when the market ends and the streets grow quiet, they disappear in the same direction. And when they return separately, no one asks, but everyone knows, and so does the priest. He preaches louder now. Warnings about fornication, damnation, lust. He describes fire and brimstone with such vigor that the children cry. But even he knows nothing he says can undo the truth of human longing. Because sex isn't about defiance. Not always. Sometimes it's the only language people have for connection, for comfort, for remembering they're alive. Still, he tries. He hangs lists on the chapel door, days when sex is forbidden. You scan the parchment, Fridays, Sundays, feast days, days of fasting, days before confession, days after childbirth, days before receiving communion. There are barely any days left, and even those come with rules. No laughter, no indulgence, no pleasure. It must be done with purpose, with grim resolve, for the sake of the soul and the family tree. But your body doesn't understand doctrine. Your body remembers touch, warmth, softness in a harsh world. You know the risk. Pregnancies that come too fast. Too many mouths to feed. The whispers that follow if a child is born too soon after a wedding, or too long after one. And worst of all, the child born out of wedlock. Because then everything changes. A girl with a belly before marriage is cast out. Her name becomes a warning, a lesson for the others. If she's lucky, her family hides her. If she's not, she's made to stand before the altar and confess as the villagers look on. Her lover often gone, or forgiven. It's not fair. You know that. But you also know that the system doesn't care about fair. It cares about order, reputation, control. And so the cycle continues. Night after night, bodies shift under blankets. Straw rustles. Feet move. Sounds drift into the room like secrets with no place to hide. You learn to listen without hearing, to see without looking, and to hold your heart in quiet spaces. Because even here, even now in this place with no private rooms, no locks, no solitude, you still dream. You still hope for something more. Not louder, not grander, just yours. You're older now. The ache in your joints sets in earlier, the weight of the day settles into your spine like wet stones. And still, nothing has changed. The walls are still thin. The nights still echo with the same familiar sighs and creaks and shifting limbs. You've learned how to turn over and pretend you're asleep even when your ears catch every whispered name, every shudder of the straw-filled mattress. There are children now, your own or your siblings or your neighbors, and they sleep nearby. Little ones barely old enough to walk, already learning that privacy is not a thing they'll ever own. You remember the first time your eldest asked what the noises meant. You didn't know how to answer. You stared at the hearth, muttered something about dreams or a sore leg. But the child knew better. Everyone knows better. Because how do you hide something in a room that holds everything? The children grow up watching you and your spouse just as you watched your parents. You wonder what they've heard, what they'll remember, and whether they'll ever be able to untangle the act from the silence, the necessity from the intimacy. You still feel eyes on you, even now, even here. When you bend over the laundry tub and hear a sudden hush behind you. When you kneel in church and feel a stare burning between your shoulder blades. When you walk to market and the old men murmur behind their mugs. You don't even need to hear the words, they've said them before. You wear them like a second skin. And yet for all that scrutiny, you still have no space of your own. The women of the village gather in the evenings, sometimes weaving or peeling vegetables, passing babies between them. You join, if only for the soft hum of their voices. You talk about harvests and illness, old wounds and new babies, but rarely about love, rarely about sex, and never about want. Because desire here is not safe. It doesn't belong to women. It's something men laugh about in the alehouse, something the priest condemns, something the midwife whispers about, only when a girl comes to her terrified and late. But inside you know better. Desire hums beneath the surface. It's in the way you tighten your braid a little neater on feast days. In the way you notice hands, strong ones, kind ones, rough ones. It's in how you sit closer than you need to, how you linger just a moment longer than the task requires. Desire becomes a secret rebellion, not against anyone, but for yourself. And when the moment comes when your spouse finally leans toward you after weeks of silence or fatigue or duty, it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like breathing again. Just for a moment. Even if the children are on the floor beside you, even if the dog stirs, even if the roof leaks and the wind howls, you don't need a room of your own. You just need a second. A flicker of softness, a heartbeat tucked inside the chaos. Still, it would be easier if the world didn't constantly intrude. Because even when you're not being watched, you're being judged. The priest talks about sin with such fire that even a kiss feels dangerous. You kneel in the confessional and feel shame spill out in silence. You say nothing because you don't know how to name the feeling that lives behind your ribs. The ache that isn't hunger. The longing that isn't grief. And sometimes you hear the stories of noble women whose love letters were intercepted and burned, of maids caught in the arms of soldiers and sent away in disgrace, of a widow stoned for carrying a child that no one claimed. You wonder what kind of world calls love a crime, and who gets to decide what is holy and what is wicked. Because the truth you've learned slowly, painfully, is that the same act can be sacred or sinful depending on who's watching. A noble's affair is poetry. A peasant girl's kiss is shame. A married couple's bedroom is duty. A single mother's belly is disgrace. And all of it happens in the same rooms, under the same roofs, with the same creaking floorboards and twitching blankets. It's just the story that changes. You think back to the stories you told yourself when you were younger. That someday you'd find a corner of the world no one else could reach. A patch of woods, a secret garden, a place where you could take someone's hand and not have to let go when footsteps approached. You still look for that place, even if it only exists inside your mind. Sometimes during the long evenings, you sit by the fire and let your thoughts drift. You remember touches that meant something, looks that stayed with you. A lover from years ago whose fingers trembled the first time they met yours. There was no room then, just a field behind a barn. But it didn't matter, because for that single hour the world was quiet. That's what you miss most, quiet. Not silence, but the absence of judgment. You want to be touched without being talked about. You want to be held without being hurried. You want to exist without explanation. And in this medieval world, that's a radical dream. But it's yours. You keep it hidden like a relic, like a piece of a song you're not supposed to remember. Because even in a world without doors, without privacy, without pause, your body still belongs to you, even if no one else believes it. The church bells toll in the distance, slow and solemn, marking the hour for vespers. Another day slides into twilight, and you gather your things, tools, baskets, bundles of cloth, and step into the narrow, smoky interior of the home you share with too many others. The air is thick with the smells of turnip stew and wet wool. A child is crying. Someone sneezes. The fire sputters not quite warm enough to comfort. And above it all, you feel it again, that weight. The weight of being seen. The impossibility of retreating into yourself when the world leaves no space to vanish into. The younger ones are already curled up near the hearth, tangled in each other's limbs, like kittens in a straw nest. You step over them gently, careful not to wake the toddler with the cough. In the far corner, your father snores with his mouth open. Across from him, your cousin mutters in her sleep, caught in some dream you'll never know. And yet you feel as though you know everything. That's the trick of it. You live so close to others, you begin to believe their thoughts aren't hidden. You anticipate gestures. You hear every breath. And eventually, you feel as though your body no longer ends at your skin, but spills out into the room available to anyone who notices. It's exhausting. You sit down beside your spouse. Neither of you speak. There's nothing new to say. You've already said it in the morning when the chickens escaped, when you worked side by side in the field, when you patched the roof together in the rain. You reach for each other in silence, your fingers brushing beneath the shared blanket. It's not passion, not exactly. It's a different kind of intimacy. One forged in necessity and repetition. One that doesn't ask for privacy because it knows there's none to be had. Still, you wait. You wait for the child's breathing to deepen, for the old man's snores to find a steady rhythm, for the house to settle just enough that your movements won't wake anyone. Then slowly, carefully, you let yourself feel. It's not glamorous. It's not poetry. But it's real. You've learned how to read the language of limbs, how to navigate closeness without crushing each other, How to find warmth in this cold, this noise, this constant exposure. But sometimes even that feels like a loss, because there's a part of you that still yearns for something else, not just sex, but solitude, not just closeness, but ownership. A space to say, this is mine, my body, my silence, my pleasure. And you begin to wonder, has anyone ever truly had that? You've heard stories of anchorites, women who bricked themselves into small chambers attached to churches. They renounced the world, lived in tiny stone rooms, never leaving, speaking only to the priest through a narrow slot in the wall. People thought they were holy, but maybe they were just tired. Tired of being seen, of being touched, of never having a place to breathe. Because even in convents, privacy is a myth. Nuns sleep in rows. Monks rise in the dark to chant together. There is no hiding, not really, only pretending. And yet people crave it. You've seen the way women drift to the edges of the fields when they think no one's looking. The way men linger near the river a little longer than needed, just for a moment to themselves. And when they return, they look a little calmer, a little less frayed. Maybe that's what you want most, not a room, not a lock, not a boundary, just a breath. But the world won't stop for that. It never does. The next morning, you're jolted awake by the slam of the door and the wail of a goat that's wandered into the firewood stack. You groan, sit up, rub your eyes. Your shoulder brushes your spouse's. There is no softness in the way your day begins, no morning embrace, no gentle return to the moment you shared. The intimacy of the night vanishes under the weight of survival. You go about your day as you always do, carrying water, washing clothes, chopping roots, and the only evidence that you ever belong to each other, even for a few minutes, is the way you both flinch at the same village gossip, the way you both glance toward the same house when someone mentions the baker's boy sneaking off with the blacksmith's daughter. You know how quickly intimacy can become ammunition. That's the other truth in this world. Sex isn't just public, it's weaponized. A rumor can ruin you. A whisper can stick longer than a scar. Women are especially vulnerable. One accusation, true or not, and her name becomes a punchline. Her virtue, her marriageability, her safety all hang in the balance. And men, though freer, are not immune. A jealous husband, a disapproving father, a drunken priest, they can all decide to turn a private act into a public punishment. You remember when they caught two lovers behind the chapel. The girl wept, begging forgiveness. The boy denied everything. He was fined. She was locked away in her uncle's cottage for months. When she returned, no one would meet her eyes. It was as if her body had become visible in a new, dangerous way. And visibility in this world is vulnerability. So you learn the rules. Don't touch too long. Don't speak too sweetly. Don't look like you're enjoying yourself. And if something does happen, deny it. Swallow it. Forget it. But you can't, because your body remembers. Not just the bad, but the good. The way someone once pressed their forehead to yours and whispered your name as if it were a prayer. The way hands found each other in the dark, not out of duty, but longing. The way breath caught in a throat, not from fear, but from awe. You cling to those memories, not because they're grand, but because they're yours. In a world where nothing is private, that's all you have, the moments no one saw, the feelings no one can name. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what intimacy truly is, not the absence of others, but the presence of something real even when the room is full. Even when the walls are made of nothing but smoke and secrets. You hold that thought as you lie down again that night. The fire burns low. The house is quiet, but never silent, and still you reach out, not just to feel, but to be felt. Tonight the wind howls outside like a hungry thing. The shutters rattle, the rafters groan. You pull your blanket higher, feel it scratch against your cheek, and listen as the cottage settles into its usual rhythm, shuffling feet, sleepy murmurs, the occasional cough. Somewhere near the hearth, someone stirs. A baby whimpers. And once again, you brace yourself for the familiar cycle of sounds you've grown used to dreading, or maybe just tolerating. Because here, under this patched and sagging roof, sex is just one more part of life's background noise. As constant as the rooster's crow, as predictable as the smell of boiled onions, as unremarkable as the smoke that curls out from the fire each morning. And yet, it never really feels unremarkable. Not when you're the one trying to fall asleep while someone else is trying to find warmth in someone else's arms. Not when the act, though private in theory, spills out into the room, into your ears, into the silence you were hoping might grant you a moment's peace. You roll to your side. There's a sliver of moonlight slipping through the gap in the roof. It lands on the worn beams above you, revealing every cobweb, every line carved by time and tension. You stare at it, unblinking. Anything to distract yourself. And yet in the quiet, your thoughts drift again toward what it means to be human in a place that leaves no room for privacy. What it means to desire when everything about your world screams restraint. You think about that moment earlier today at the communal well. A young man glanced at the baker's daughter and held her gaze for half a second, too long. Just enough to stir the air. Just enough to be noticed. By mid-afternoon, 3 women had whispered it. By sunset, the priest had frowned in his direction during prayers. That's how fast desire travels here. It doesn't need a bed. It doesn't even need skin. Just a look. Just a pause, just the idea of something more. And that's all it takes to mark you. Even the idea of intimacy in this world is risky. It doesn't matter whether you act on it or not. If people think you might have, that's enough. They'll watch you differently, speak to you differently. Your name will change slowly, subtly, from good girl to one of those, from modest man to watch him closely. You know this. You've lived this. You once dared to kiss someone behind the barley shed. Just once. Just lips brushing lips, both of you shaking with fear and excitement. You swore no one saw, but somehow someone always does. The next morning your aunt looked at you too long. Your neighbor asked if you'd sinned. Your cousin warned you quietly but firmly not to ruin yourself. That word. Ruin. As if you were something fragile, something that could be spoiled. As if your body weren't already marked by a dozen other things, labor fatigue, hunger, cold. As if desire was the worst of your wounds. But even so, you still want. And want doesn't go away just because the world gives you no place to express it. You start to notice how people carve out little oases of privacy in strange places. A brief walk into the woods to check traps that don't need checking. A trip to the upper pasture to look at the clouds. A longer stay at the bathhouse knowing that steamy silence provides better cover than any wall ever could. And when they return, their cheeks are flushed, not just from exertion, but from something warmer, something stolen. That's the paradox of this world. You're never alone. But intimacy, real intimacy, is something people steal like bread. They snatch it when they can eat it quickly and pray no one saw. It's not just lovers who do this. Even married couples do it. Especially them. Because after years of routine of whispered exchanges beneath threadbare blankets, they still dream of a night without interruption. A touch that isn't hurried. A sigh that isn't stifled. You've seen it in your own home. An older couple long past their childbearing years sitting close by the fire when no one's watching, her head leaning against his shoulder, his hand absent-mindedly stroking her wrist. No words, just closeness, a language all their own. They don't need a private room. They've built one in each other. But not everyone is so lucky. You think of the girl from 3 cottages down. She disappeared for 2 weeks, then returned pale and quiet. People say she'd been sent away, the kind of phrase that carries no details but all the meaning in the world. Her body told a story, and someone had decided that story needed hiding. No one asks her what happened. No one dares. Because here, shame isn't healed, it's avoided. People carry it like invisible sacks on their backs, and they make sure others feel the weight of it too. So when you lie down at night next to someone you trust, you do so carefully. Not because you don't want them, but because you know the world might never forgive you for it. Even if you're married, even if it's quiet, even if it's done out of love. Because love is complicated here. It's both expected and suppressed, necessary and forbidden, celebrated and condemned, all depending on how it's seen, who's doing the seeing, and how loudly the bed creaks. So you learn to live in the gaps, between glances, between footsteps, between gossip. You find meaning in what goes unsaid, in a sigh, in a smile, in the brushing of fingers under the table during supper while the children laugh over something else entirely. That's your version of privacy. It isn't space. It's presence. It's choosing to feel despite the noise, to care despite the risk, to keep a part of yourself yours even when nothing else is. And maybe that's why when your partner touches your face tonight, just lightly, just briefly, you close your eyes. Not in shame, but in defiance. Because here in this single-room house with a sleeping family at your feet and a gossiping village at your back, you've done something miraculous. You've made room for love, even when the world refuses to give you any. The fire's embers have gone dim again, just faintly glowing, like a tired heartbeat beneath the blackened logs. You can hear someone's breath rasping nearby, the telltale wheeze of a cold settling deep in the chest. A child rolls over and lets out a muffled whimper. The dog scratches at something unseen. Your own body aches from the hard ground beneath the straw mattress, from the work of the day, from the weight of your own thoughts. And still, even in this worn and weary state, desire finds you. Not a blazing kind, the one the priests condemn in their sermons, the one the songs turn into foolish fantasy, but a quiet kind. A soft and persistent longing that settles deep in your bones, not just for touch, but for recognition, for refuge, for a corner of this crowded world that is only yours. But the truth is there are no corners. You live like a stone in a jar packed in tight with others bumping and scraping as the days roll on. Everything you do is witnessed. Even if no one comments, they see. They know, and that knowing wraps around every act you perform, every stolen kiss, every look held too long, every rustle in the night that isn't from turning over. People remember, and they don't forget. You've learned to move with caution, not fear exactly, but awareness. The awareness that whatever privacy you manage to carve out for yourself is an illusion at best and a temporary one. Still, illusions matter. like the illusion of a private moment when your spouse reaches for your hand beneath the blanket and no one else stirs. Or when you both rise earlier than the others and share a piece of bread together, at the hearth, eyes meeting in the flicker of early light, words unspoken. You live for those scraps. Sometimes you wonder if it was better before. Before you knew what it was to yearn. Before you knew that love could feel like this delicate, urgent, endangered. You think of the younger ones, how easily they laugh, how quickly they believe in love stories told by traveling minstrels, how they still think privacy means ducking behind a curtain, how they don't yet realize that secrecy is different from solitude and far less forgiving. The older you get, the more careful you become. You learn to listen for the rhythm of the room, the rise and fall of breath, the creak of floorboards, the sniff of someone not quite asleep. You learn to time your moments between the pauses. You learn to lie still after, even if your heart is thudding, even if your body still tingles from the heat you're not supposed to feel. You've grown skilled at making love in silence, not just for the sake of modesty, but for survival. Because if someone hears, they'll talk. If they talk, they'll judge. And if they judge, everything changes. Reputation once bruised doesn't heal in this world. It scars. And those scars shape everything. You've seen women passed over for marriage because someone thought they were too friendly with the Cooper's son 3 years ago. You've heard stories of men dragged to the stocks over rumors of nighttime visits that may or may not have happened. It doesn't take truth to ruin someone. Just attention. And attention is everywhere. Even the walls seem to listen. You remember the time you slipped away during the festival of St. Martin? Just an hour. Just you and someone who made you feel seen in a way no one else had. You found a hollow behind the church garden, a patch of grass shielded by shrubs. You didn't do anything scandalous, not really. Just lay beside each other. Spoke quietly. Touched hands. But the next day, someone mentioned your absence. Asked who you'd been with. Smiled too knowingly when you denied everything. You learned then that the world is always watching. And if it can't see, it imagines. So now, even when your desires rise, you keep them hidden behind your eyes. Even when your body aches for connection, you hide it in labor. Even when your heart wants more, you teach it to ask for less. Not because you're ashamed, but because you've lived long enough to know that intimacy, when shared too freely, becomes a story owned by others. So you guard yours. And when you do choose to share it, it means something. Even if it's just a look across a crowded room. Even if it's just a hand that lingers an extra second as it passes you a loaf of bread. There's power in restraint. Not the kind that the church preaches. Not the denial of flesh for the sake of salvation. But the restraint that says, I know what this means. I choose it carefully. I give it freely to someone who won't use it against me. That's the kind of love you believe in now. Not the loud kind. Not the desperate kind. The quiet kind. The patient kind. The kind that survives under scrutiny, under suspicion, under the crushing weight of communal life. The kind that whispers, I see you even when the rest of the world is looking away or looking too closely. And tonight, as you lie beside someone who has seen you at your worst, your most vulnerable, your most tired, you allow yourself to reach out. Not to be heard, but to be felt. It's not grand. It's not fireworks. It's a thumb grazing a wrist, a shoulder brushing against your own, a shared breath. And in a world that leaves you nowhere to hide, it feels like everything. You don't mark time in days anymore. Not really. You mark it in seasons, in harvests, in the number of candles left in your stash, and how many nights the wind screams through the cracks in the wall before the first frost sets in. You mark it in how long it's been since you last had a real moment to yourself. And those moments, well, they've grown rarer with age. You lie on your back tonight, eyes open to the rafters, the same ones you've stared at since childhood. You remember tracing the knots in the wood when you were little, imagining they were stars. Back then you didn't yet understand what all the nighttime noises meant. You thought the grown-ups were restless sleepers. You thought the whimpers and creaks and sudden shuffling were dreams, or maybe pain. No one told you otherwise. No one ever tells children what they already know, because everyone learns eventually. Now you lie still, not because you're afraid to wake someone, but because you don't want to hear what's happening a few feet away. The young couple in the far corner, they're newly married. You remember your own first weeks of marriage. Awkward, hesitant, a rush of nerves, and no curtain, no hush. Just the relentless presence of everyone else in the room, pretending not to notice while you tried to find your way with a stranger's body. You turn away, give them the space they don't actually have, that no one has. Not in a peasant's cottage, not in a shared manor hall, not even in a castle full of guards and tapestries. Because even the nobles are followed by whispers. Their secrets have longer legs. They travel down staircases, through kitchens, along the corridors of stone. A countess kisses her handmaiden in the garden, and by morning the stable boys know. A knight spends one too many evenings alone with a certain squire, and suddenly the kitchen maids speak in lowered tones. Privacy, even at the top, is never full. But here where you live, it's not even an idea. Your entire life takes place in one room. Maybe two if your family's lucky. You eat, sleep, cook, give birth, cry, make love, and die all within reach of the same four walls. And everyone hears everything. It's no wonder that people turn quiet. There's a kind of stillness that settles in when you have no space of your own. Not a peaceful stillness, but one born of survival. You learn not to ask for too much. You compress yourself inward. You fold your hopes into the corners of your thoughts and press your desires into the cracks of your heart, like dried herbs, still fragrant, but hidden away. And still, even now, even after all these years, you find yourself hoping for just one night, one single night, where no one else is there. Not because you want to do anything scandalous, not even because you want to be touched, but because you want to stretch out your limbs without brushing someone else. You want to whisper your own name and hear no one repeat it behind your back. You want to cry and not have someone ask if it's about a man. You want to undress without the need to cover yourself immediately, not from shame but from the certainty of being seen. You want to breathe and be invisible, just for a moment. But this world doesn't allow that. Instead, you take what you can. A pause in conversation, a stolen nap in the hayloft while everyone's at mass, an evening walk where the dusk covers you like a cloak and the trees don't ask questions. It's during one of those walks that you see them, the boy and girl from 2 villages over. Young, flushed, barefoot. They think they're alone. You don't stop them. You don't call out. You just watch for a moment from behind the hedgerow. And you smile, not because you envy them, but because you remember. You remember what it felt like to touch someone without fear, to be young and reckless just for a moment, to believe that love was enough to make up for the lack of space for the cold, for the audience of ears and eyes that never seem to sleep. They kiss. He brushes a strand of hair from her cheek. She laughs quietly, like she's not allowed to be happy, but can't help it. And then they vanish into the woods. You keep walking. When you return home, the air inside is already thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and wood smoke. Someone is kneading dough in the corner. Someone else is bandaging a sore ankle. The children run in circles around a bent old man who waves his cane half-heartedly. And in the center of it all, your bed, your shared blanket, your spouse's eyes meeting yours with a tired tenderness. You sit beside them. There's no grand gesture, no sweet words, just hands meeting hands, skin to skin, warm and worn. And later, as night swallows the room again, you lie close. Not for passion, not for duty, but for nearness. It's not privacy, but it's something close. And in this life, that's the most you can ask for. Not a locked door, but a trusted silence. Not a room of your own, but a body beside yours that doesn't take more than you're willing to give. And a heartbeat in the dark that says, I see you, even here, even now. The air inside the cottage is thick tonight. Not with heat, there's none of that, but with the presence of too many bodies breathing the same recycled drafts of cold smoke and sweat. You're crammed close with the same people you've lived beside for years, family, kin, and those who've simply stayed too long to leave. And like every night, as the fire dies, so too does the illusion of personal space. You feel it the moment you lie down. A knee brushes yours. A shoulder presses against your spine. The blanket shared between you and your partner tugs as someone turns on the far side. There's no room. And yet somehow you're supposed to find peace here. Tonight you can't sleep. Not because of the noise, but because of the silence. A heavy, weighted quiet that feels too full. Something's happening. You sense it. And then you hear it, the careful rustle of cloth. The softest of exhales. A quiet shift in rhythm that only someone accustomed to hearing everything would notice. They're trying to be discreet. You can't fault them. You've done the same. Who hasn't? In this world, when the opportunity appears, you take it even if your mother-in-law is snoring 2 feet away, even if the baby might stir, even if the creaking of the bed frame risks waking the entire room. There are no alternatives. There's nowhere to go. And so you lie there, eyes open, listening to a moment that doesn't belong to you. It's not arousing. It's not revolting. It's something in between, too familiar to be shocking, too intimate to ignore. You think of your own first time. How frightened you were. How clumsy. How you tried not to cry, not because it hurt, but because it was too much. Too loud even when it was quiet. Too real even when no one said a word. The memory has stayed with you not just of the act, but of the way the room seemed to hold its breath, as if the space itself was bearing witness. It always is. Privacy here is a myth. You've accepted that. What you haven't accepted is how invisible that makes you feel, as though you don't deserve space. As though your needs are always subject to someone else's schedule. As though your body is never fully yours, not in the morning, not at night, not even in the fragile hours in between. And yet you persist. You find intimacy in gestures so small, they'd go unnoticed anywhere else. A gentle squeeze of your hand. A whispered thank you as you wash their feet after a long day. The way they brush your hair from your face while the others sleep. You make love when you can. Sometimes it's careful, calculated, held back. Other times it's desperate quiet only because it has to be. And when it's over, you lie there and pretend the room is yours alone. That the soft breathing nearby is just wind. That the whisper of someone turning over is only the house shifting on its foundation. Pretending becomes a kind of ritual. You tell yourself that no one heard, no one noticed, that the woman on the pallet beside you was asleep the whole time, that the children dreamed too deeply to understand, that the neighbor on the other side of the wall is too deaf to catch the creak of the floorboard. You tell yourself this because it's easier and believing that you're never truly alone. And yet you long for more than just illusion. You dream of a bed with walls, not thick ones, just enough to hold your breath inside, just enough to kiss without fear, just enough to speak without whispering. But even in castles you've heard the stories. Royal couples making love behind velvet drapes, while servants sneak glances through gaps in the fabric. Dukes caught with chambermaids. Queens whose pregnancies were announced not by decree, but by the chatter of wet nurses and guards. There's nowhere in this world untouched by eyes and ears. Still, people keep trying. A young girl from your village was caught last spring. She'd run off into the woods with her sweetheart, hoping to find some peace, some solitude. They were found 2 days later, cold, exhausted, and smiling, like they'd touched heaven. She was whipped. He was fined. But neither of them stopped smiling. You asked her once if it had been worth it. She said yes, because in those woods no one had watched. You think about that often. And sometimes you consider taking the same risk. Not because you need to act on some great passion, but because you want to hear yourself breathe. You want to touch someone without flinching at every noise. You want to feel what love is like when it's not half wrapped in fear. But tonight, that kind of freedom is impossible. So you lie still. You listen. You let the other couple finish their breathing, slowing their mattress, sighing beneath them. You wait until their hands go still, until the quiet returns. And then maybe you roll closer to your own partner. You don't say anything. You just find the crook of their shoulder and settle in. They don't ask for more. They don't press. They just place their hand on your arm, steady and warm, and hold it there. It's not passion, not tonight, but it's presence. And in this place, that's enough. That's everything. You awaken to the sound of water being poured from a clay jug. It's morning already. The fire's gone cold. The room smells of damp earth and wool and sweat and human breath, layers of it, from a dozen lungs that never stopped working through the night. Someone coughs. Someone curses under their breath as they stretches sore limbs. Someone laughs too loudly, and the spell of the night is broken. No one says anything about what was heard. Not because they didn't hear it, but because that's the rule. You act like the night didn't happen. Like no one turned under thin covers chasing warmth or closeness, or simply the illusion of solitude. Like no one whispered or moaned or stifled themselves as they moved against a body they've known too well or not at all. You sit up slowly. Your back aches. Your legs feel heavy. And yet your mind is strangely clear. The clarity that only comes when you've been kept awake not by noise but by the sharp awareness that you exist in a world where everything you do, every breath, every gesture, every intimacy is shared, whether you offer it or not. You dress in silence, fingers moving through practiced motions. Shift apron, shawl. The garments are plain, functional, always the same. Nothing here is designed to be sensual. Not your clothes, not your movements, not your space. And yet your body remembers desire even when the world insists you forget. And then it happens again. A glance, a passing touch as your partner walks by, fingers grazing yours, just enough to be felt, just enough to say, last night wasn't just function. It meant something. You don't return the gesture right away. Not here, not with others watching. You wait. Later, perhaps behind the haystack, or when you're both tending the chickens or in the quiet moment between dusk and supper, you'll let your shoulder rest against theirs for a little longer than needed, and they'll understand. This is the language you've been forced to invent, one of fragments, glimpses, half-finished moments. Because in a world where you never have privacy, love must speak in symbols. It doesn't matter whether you're married or not. Even wedded couples feel like they're sneaking. Because love, the real kind, the vulnerable kind, needs space. It needs the freedom to unfold. And here that freedom is always a breath away from being stolen. You try not to be bitter. After all, this is the life everyone around you knows. It's not that they've chosen it. They've inherited it the same way you inherit the shape of your hands or the slope of your nose. You were born into a one-room house, into fields and cold and community. And with that came the certainty that your body would always be on display. Not naked, perhaps, but always witnessed. You've grown so used to it, in fact, that when you do find yourself alone, even briefly, it's disorienting. Like stepping outside after weeks in a smoke-filled cottage and breathing clean air. Your body reacts before your mind does. You uncurl, you sigh, you remember. And sometimes those moments come in strange places, like the edge of the woods when you're sent out to gather herbs. You find a fallen tree damp with moss and sit for a moment. Just one, just to be alone. The trees are tall here. The air hums with birdsong. No footsteps, no voices, no one breathing near you. You slip off your shoes, stretch your toes in the grass, and close your eyes. It's not much, but it's yours. And it makes you ache, not in pain, in longing. Because for a moment, you remember what it feels like to be untouched, to be unobserved, to just be. You imagine what it would be like to make love here. Not because it's secret or forbidden, but because it's free. You imagine reaching for someone not in silence or panic, but in calm, in peace, without the fear of ears in the dark, without the shame of being overheard. And then just as quickly, the moment passes. A twig snaps in the distance. You stand, wipe your palms on your apron, slip back into the rhythm of life. But that feeling, it stays. It becomes a lantern you carry in your chest, even when the walls press in. And it changes the way you love. Because now when your partner touches you beneath the blanket, you don't just endure. You don't just perform. You close your eyes and recall that field, that moss, that hush. You let your body remember something softer, and your partner feels it. They move slower. They hold you differently. You're not just something to be used. You're someone to be cherished. It doesn't last long. A child stirs. A dog growls in its sleep. But it's enough. A moment like that can carry you for days. You begin to see that maybe privacy was never going to be a physical thing in this life. Maybe it was always going to be something interior. A quiet inside you. A small garden of stillness planted in your soul where no one else can enter. And if you can tend to it, if you can keep it alive, then maybe you'll survive. Not just the noise, not just the cold, but the constant erosion of self that comes from being watched, judged, known too well. So you guard your inner quiet, fiercely. You offer yourself when you choose. You love when it's safe. You retreat when you must. And when the night comes again, when the blankets are pulled tight, and the room settles into its restless hush, you close your eyes, not in fear, but in strength. Because though you share the room, your mind is your own. And inside it, there is a place no one can touch. Tonight the firewood runs low. The chill creeps in early, curling around your ankles like a cat made of ice. The cottage holds its usual clutter tools stacked along the wall, cloaks drying near the door, a line of herbs hanging from the rafters, but the air feels thinner somehow, as though something unspoken lingers in it. You're wrapped in your blanket, back against your spouse, trying to ignore the quiet argument unfolding on the other side of the room. It's whispered, but not well. A man's sharp hiss, a woman's shaky reply. The unmistakable tension of a disagreement born of frustration, not fury. You hear one of the children stir. Someone coughs. Then silence. A heavy one. You know what it means. He wants something. She doesn't. But there's nowhere for that resistance to go. And so what happens now, you don't know. You never ask, because the cruelest part of this world isn't just the lack of privacy. It's the way silence protects the wrong things. Everyone sees, but no one speaks. Everyone hears, but no one interrupts. There's a hierarchy of need and a culture of consent that doesn't exist. Marriage means ownership, duty, obedience. Love is optional. Voice is optional. Space is out of the question. You lie there still and powerless, listening to a rustle of movement that turns your stomach. You've known this kind of silence before. Perhaps not in your own body, but in the bodies of those around you. You've seen women turn inward, smaller, quieter, their laughter disappearing over time. You've seen bruises hidden beneath sleeves. You've watched a girl look at the floor when her husband speaks as if even her gaze is a risk. This is the underside of the noise. The hidden cost of living without walls. Because when everyone lives together, not everything is shared equally. Power still moves unevenly. Men still dominate. Women still endure. And the space that's denied to everyone becomes especially violent when forced upon someone who has no say. You think of the priest again, how he preaches that a woman's body belongs to her husband, that she must not withhold herself, that the act is holy no matter the context, so long as it's within marriage. But you know that's not true. You've seen holy things twisted in the name of order. And so intimacy becomes not just a challenge but a minefield. Every gesture weighed, every breath considered, every touch shadowed by the question, is this love or obligation? And still people try. They try to love anyway. You've seen a young man wrap his arms around his wife after she gave birth, holding her with a gentleness rarely allowed in a world that expects strength, not softness. You've seen an old woman reach for her husband's hand as they kneel together in mass, their fingers laced like ivy. You've felt it too, on better nights, when the world is just quiet enough, when your partner doesn't reach for you as a demand but waits, when the blanket is pulled over both of you slowly, when your eyes meet and the noise of the room snoring, coughing, muttering, fades just enough for one breath of tenderness. In those moments, you reclaim something, not privacy, but dignity. Because even if the space is shared, the experience can still be yours. You begin to understand that real intimacy isn't about the absence of others. It's about the presence of respect, and respect is rare. It's not taught here, not openly. Boys are told to be strong, to take what's theirs. Girls are told to endure, to accept, to expect little. Marriage is presented as a transaction. A girl becomes a wife becomes a mother, and anything else is excess. But still, you know people who resist, quietly. You've seen lovers invent a new language, a touch on the wrist for yes, a pause for no. You've seen couples sleep back to back when they're not in sync, respecting each other's distance, even within the same shared mattress. You've seen love take root in the soil of constraint. And maybe that's the most miraculous part. That people can still love without privacy, still desire without space, still honor each other without permission. But it takes work, more than it should. And the cost of that work is always carried in silence. Because no one claps for a man who listens. No one praises a woman who says no and is heard. Those things don't get noticed, not here. Not in a world that only measures your worth by how quietly you carry your burdens. You carry yours in your chest, wrapped in that memory of saying not tonight and not being made to explain, of curling beside someone who let you sleep instead of insisting you serve, of being wanted, not taken. Those moments, though small, are everything. They give you the strength to keep hoping that maybe the next generation will learn something different, that maybe the boys growing up in this cottage overhearing these same midnight sounds will one day understand what no one ever taught their fathers, that a woman's body is not a reward, not a right, not a relic to be claimed. It's her own. Even if the room is shared, even if the walls are thin, even if the world says otherwise. So you close your eyes tonight and whisper a prayer not for space, not for silence, but for kindness. Because in a place where privacy is impossible, kindness is the only protection you have. And if you can hold on to that, if you can teach it live, nurture it, then maybe the walls won't matter so much after all. The cottage is quieter tonight, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Everyone worked harder than usual, harvest time, you think, or maybe just the strain of too many mouths and too little food. The air is thick with soot and sweat, and the coals in the hearth offer only the faintest glow. You're nestled in your usual spot, a dip in the straw mattress that fits your body now like a mold. Beside you, your partner breathes slow and steady. Across the room, someone coughs in their sleep. You lie there, eyes wide, not yet ready for dreams. Instead, you drift into that space between awareness and memory, the place where your thoughts grow long and your truths grow loud. And what you think about again and again is how people find ways to love in a life so stripped of softness. Because there's nothing soft about this world. Not the floor beneath your feet, or the food on your plate, or the voices that tell you what you owe. Life here is sharp, hard, bordered by rules and rhythms that don't care if you're tired or aching or broken. But somehow, despite all that, love still happens. You've seen it in corners, in gestures, in pauses. A mother brushing her child's hair with fingers calloused from the loom. A boy placing a wildflower on a girl's seat before Mass. A husband stopping in the middle of mending tools to tuck his wife's loose braid behind her ear. Little things. So small they'd go unnoticed anywhere else. But here, where everything is public and nothing is yours, they become sacred. You've learned that in the absence of privacy, reverence must be reinvented. You don't close the door, you can't. So instead, you lower your voice. You hold someone's gaze longer than the world deems necessary. You find ways to say I care without saying anything at all. And still you wonder, what would it feel like to simply shut a door behind you, to light a candle and not worry who else can see, to take off your clothes without thinking of whether someone is awake in the dark? It's not luxury you crave, just distance, space to be vulnerable. But even without it, you've made do. You've learned to love in whispers, to offer yourself in fragments, to accept intimacy in doses you can afford. And sometimes that's enough, but sometimes it's not. There are nights when the lack of space feels like a weight on your chest, when every creak of the floor, every shift of a sleeping body nearby makes you tense up, when even the idea of being touched feels like a burden instead of a balm. You turn over, then slowly, quietly pressing your face into your arm. Your partner doesn't reach for you. They've learned to read your breathing. They know what it means when you curl in. They don't push. They simply stay close enough to be there if you change your mind. That too is love. Not the grand declarations of troubadours and courtly tales, but the steady presence of someone who knows how to leave space without leaving you. You remember the tales from those songs, of course. Silken beds and blushing lovers and secret gardens where kisses were exchanged under moonlight. You used to wonder if any of it was real. If any noble ever truly had that kind of love. Or if it was just another myth to make you forget the grit under your nails and the straw in your hair. But now you think it doesn't matter. Because what you have is real. It's not romantic in the way ballads say love should be. There are no rose petals, no fine linens, just two people learning to survive together in a world that gives them no room to fall apart. And in that there is something truer than poetry. Because every act of tenderness here is hard-won. It takes courage to love someone when you're always being watched. It takes strength to stay soft in a world that makes you hard. It takes faith to believe that what you share in the shadows has worth even if no one ever sees it. And you do believe it. You believe it in the way your partner wraps their arm around you now, not possessively, not hungrily, but as if to say, I know this is hard. I'm here anyway. You let your body soften just a little. You breathe slower. The tension unwinds inch by inch. You let yourself remember that love isn't always about privacy. Sometimes it's about endurance. Sometimes it's about knowing someone well enough that you don't need space, you just need understanding. And understanding is what keeps you from becoming hollow. It's what makes this life bearable, even in the cold, even in the dark, even in the noise. Especially in the noise. Because no matter how many people sleep in this room, this moment, this quiet, unseen moment between the two of you is yours, and you claim it. You claim it with a small kiss pressed to their shoulder, with a hand resting gently on their side, with the choice to stay connected even when the world offers you nothing but distance. There's no need to say anything. Love here doesn't live in words. It lives in silence that's finally mercifully shared. The sky outside is still ink black when you stir again. There's a hush over the room deeper than usual, as if the night itself is holding its breath. Everyone is sleeping, really sleeping now. You can tell by the rhythm of it. The creaking has stopped. The murmurs are gone. Just the faint crackle of a dying ember, and the slow, synchronized inhale and exhale of a dozen bodies layered like patchwork beneath a sagging roof. This is as close to silence as you'll ever get. You lie there and let your gaze travel across the room. You can make out the shapes you know so well, your sister curled tightly under her shawl, your father with his mouth slightly open, the children in a tangle of arms and legs. You see their outlines and think we've built a life in a space the size of a cart shed. We've laughed, fought, wept, given birth, and yes, loved right here in full view of each other. Somehow, impossibly, this is what we call home. And you feel the weight of it. The strange, unrelenting presence of others. The absence of solitude. The reality that every act of affection, every gesture of intimacy, has had to contend with that. But you've also learned something else. That what begins as inconvenience sometimes becomes meaning. That closeness, even forced, can turn into care. That the absence of privacy can produce a different kind of love, one that thrives not because of space but in spite of it. You shift slightly, and your partner stirs beside you. They don't speak. They simply slide their hand beneath yours and hold it there warm and still. You think about how many nights you've shared this bed. Not a proper one, not a feather mattress behind closed doors. Just straw, sometimes damp, sometimes crawling with mites. But it was yours. Yours together. The two of you made something in this small place that no one else could touch. That's the lesson you've come to understand. In a world without rooms, love becomes an act of quiet rebellion. Not the loud, desperate kind. The slow, steady kind. The kind that whispers yes when everything around you screams no. The kind that endures not because it's easy, but because you've both decided it's worth it. And it is worth it. You see it now so clearly. Love doesn't need walls to flourish. It needs presence. It needs care. It needs the willingness to say, this moment, this breath, this hand in mine, this belongs to us, even if everything else does not. You look at your partner, their features softened by sleep, and you smile. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You remember every time you had to hold back laughter in the dark. Every shared smirk when the bed creaked at the wrong time. Every time you touched fingers under the blanket, and it felt like holding a secret that could warm your entire soul. That's what love becomes here, not grand, but grounded. Not glittering, but glowing. And the more you think about it, the more you realize you've lived your whole life in public. But the things that mattered most happened in private anyway. Inside your mind, inside your heart, inside the small, quiet gestures you gave to one another when no one else was truly paying attention. You inhale, exhale. And for the first time in a long time, you feel full. Not with food, not with sleep, but with a kind of peace. Because you have survived in this world not by finding space, but by making space where there was none. By carving out little hollows of tenderness in a life too crowded with noise. By choosing love in a world that didn't give you room for it. And tomorrow, when the rooster cries and the door swings open and everyone bustles and barks and begins again, you'll carry this with you. This softness, this hand, this moment. Because even in a single room with no doors, no locks, no solitude, you've found something that feels like yours. And no one, not the church, not the neighbors, not the endless routine of waking and working and weeping, can take that from you. Not now, not ever. You're still lying there, aren't you? Eyes half closed now, you're breathing slower, the air around you still humming softly. The fire has burned down to its final ember. There's nothing left but warmth drifting off in little invisible curls. The room has fallen quiet for good. No more footsteps, no more whispers. Just the kind of hush that belongs only to the final stretch of night. You can almost feel the weight of those old wool blankets. The stiff linen at your neck. The presence of someone beside you, not too close, not too far. Just close enough to remind you you are not alone. Not here, not now. And maybe that's what matters most. Not the walls, not the silence, but the moments where even in a crowded world you made something soft, something true. The floor doesn't creak anymore. The wind outside has calmed. Everyone in the village is asleep. And now so are you, or close to it. Let the noise of the day fade away. Let the voices quiet. Let your body sink just a little deeper. And if there's someone beside you, reach for them, or imagine you do. Maybe you hold a hand. Maybe you just breathe together. Because tonight in your dreams, there are no crowded rooms, no judgment, no whispered stories behind your back, only space, only warmth, only peace. Good night.